Good afternoon, and it is my pleasure to be able to drive home with you. I cannot say that I am one to be stuck in traffic because I've been blessed to be home for the last, Kyle, I think is now 11 or 12 years that I've left the corporate rat race. But I do
Lucky.
appreciate that it is a trying time in the afternoon, especially for those working in Port of Spain and driving towards Central South. So hopefully we can turn your afternoon on a Thursday afternoon into something a bit more productive. Yeah. And I have with me this afternoon Kiel Taklalsingh. He is not a stranger. Well, actually, we're both strangers to this hour. We're normally doing morning shows, Kyle.
Yep,
Look,
indeed,
my
indeed.
hair is all dry now.
First time on drive time. I remember as a sixth former, almost every afternoon I would listen to one or two on evenings, to the drive. Those days were with Sprang and Anil, and I think eventually was Skippy at some point, and now it's you.
Yes, and that was me. And well,
Yeah.
now it's me and you because you're here. So
Well,
so you're no longer doing the listening, you're doing the talking. You're graduating,
pleasure,
Kyle.
pleasure,
Right. So I
pleasure.
mean, I looked at the newspaper yesterday. I didn't look at today's one yet. Um, but oh gosh, you see now I pulled up my phone, but now there are ads. But it's just I actually made a post about it because there are a lot of people that talk about you cannot listen to the news anymore. It's not good for your mental health. You just see murder after murder after murder. It doesn't seem positive at all. But then there's also the other side where I say to people, well, you can't just put your head in the sand and think positive thoughts and have positive affirmations and hope everything go away. So we do have to find a balance between being informed and I mean the little girl in Maruga, 5 years old, being shot in her face. I think if I remember the story correctly, she was shot multiple times in her face. I mean that is the murders. We talk about them becoming more gruesome. We talk about them daylight, whenever, whoever, however. It's almost becoming normalized that we're seeing little children being murdered. No one cares anymore that, well, someone's holding their child. It doesn't matter anymore. Because I mean, I know of the 2-year old that was in Diego Martin. That was like so close by. In fact, I knew someone who was in the car. The guy was hired to drive. Poor thing. um so you just more and more and more you hear of children. The story in Big Yard, I would have grown up in Big Yard, and my aunts would have told this. I mean, the blood of the little girl. Gosh, I can't remember her name right now, but she would have been in Form One, about Form One or Two, and her blood passed by my home. My aunts, and they still live there, and the blood was in the drain, being washed down. And so the crime is I feel out of control. And then so my post was, there was just a mix of emotions because there is a sadness over the loss of young life. There's a frustration with the dengue situation. A father of 5 died. I know of someone who's urgently, he's begging for blood because he has a nephew, a young nephew, under 10, in the hospital fighting for his life. And I feel as though dengue to me seems so incredibly preventable. Dr. Rai Ragbir was trying to join us, but he unfortunately could not. And I'm hearing that he's dealing with a lot, specifically with regards to dengue in his constituency. And of course he is in the health sector. And as I say, I feel as though there's a I almost sit back and go, how? This is COVID was one thing, but this is a mosquito. This is not airborne, where it's some
Yeah.
strain of something that we know nothing about. It feels so incredibly preventable, something that if we manage properly, we will not be losing lives to dengue in 2024. you know and then there is what to me feels like an irritation. So I spoke about sadness, frustration, or disbelief, and then there's sheer irritation, I have to admit. And I don't want the show to be about pounding any one party or pounding any one politician. But at the end of the day, the prime minister is the prime minister. The buck stops with him. And so for him to just casually say, listen, it's not going to cost us millions of dollars to change the coat of arms. And then this is the same person that said, in case you were closing your fridge, I'm not shutting down Petrotrin. you know
Yeah.
so there's that irritation, and there's the irritation where and I know that you're here to speak specifically to the Constitution and to coat of arms, so I'm going to use that to carry us into the conversation, because there was something that I highlighted, and I know that you would have read it and you would do such a much better job than I would.
No
So
pressure.
I'm going to shut up shortly, I promise. But where is it? Right. 6.5 on page 160. The population wants to participate. That is what I highlighted. That is what I underlined, because here you have, and the report, and now you're Dr. Farrell would have said, listen, we didn't recommend changing the coat of arms. We did recommend having our national symbols included in the Constitution, but certainly not changing the coat of arms. So you have on one hand the reports coming out, and the report I want to quote it. It's 6.5, and it's to the end. It's the second paragraph of 6.5. As the population is indicating clearly, it wants to participate meaningfully in the decisions which affect their lives. It wants a more representative and responsible parliament. So after you've put this in a report, we've spent money on this report, we've taken the time to listen to citizens, what's coming out of the report is the population wants clearly to participate. They want to participate. And then on the heel of that, the prime minister stands up and says, we're changing the coat of arms. We're removing the ships. We're adding the steel pan. And, it's not going to cost us millions of dollars. Just stop it. No consultation. And in fact, it happened to me even worse, because it wasn't an address to the nation. You were speaking at a political party's event to members of your political party.
Yeah, correct.
So they got to hear about it first.
Yes.
Because almost as though they were more important than other members of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself, the way the announcement was made,
Yeah.
So you have that. And of course, we can go into a lot with that, because persons will say, the color red, or the history of the PNM sort of taking over the history of Trinidad.
Correct.
And so, as I say, I don't want it to be a bashing PNM show or anything like that. But it is a cause for concern that you can speak about a national emblem at changing it at a PNM convention. So it's bad enough, and I'm going to leave that for you to discuss, but it's bad enough that you announced it without consultation, without any of it. But you did not announce it to the nation. You announced it to PNM members. So I'm going to leave you to take over. I'm going to start now.
Oh, well, it's a conversation, and I accept.
Constitution first, whichever.
That's okay. I found it, I too, just to pick off probably where you last left off, I found it particularly hypocritical that here you have the People's National Movement and the Prime Minister convening a conference to discuss a report on our Constitution and reforming our Constitution. And a clear and emerging theme in that report is that citizens want to participate more in democratic decisions and decision making in our country. And then you go to perhaps one of the most important symbols of our country, and you unilaterally announce a change without any invitation to the wider population to participate, give their views, and discuss the matter, and perhaps make alternative suggestions. I have no difficulty with the PAN, and quite frankly, I have no difficulty with the national instrument being given prominence in any symbol. That's fine. The problem is process. You have to adopt a process that allows all of your citizens the opportunity to have their say, especially when you are changing things which essentially affect their national identity. And then the reasoning I saw that the prime minister gave subsequent to it, I think is not good. He talks about, historicity and whether or not this is a more appropriate historical, those things, historians say that history is essentially morally neutral. You don't look at history to pass moral judgment on people. Yes, you may take your views, etc. But you study history to learn, to understand, and to avoid making some of the mistakes, even if you want to go that far. But it's more important that we understand history. Now, one could understand why those ships were included on the coat of arms by a real historian, Dr. Eric Williams at the time. He was the prime minister. He was a historian. He was an Oxford historian, or Cambridge, Oxford, I believe it was, yes. He was a historian, so he understood it. And let's be real, the Christopher Columbus, for whatever you want to say about him subsequently and genocide, etc., it is the crossing of the sea with those ships that was a watershed moment, not only in Trinidad's history, but in world history, because that was the time when the East Hemisphere was connected with the West Hemisphere. It was one of the first times, right, that you had emerging trade. And yes, it meant conquest, but throughout human history, there have been conquests and cultures. In fact, Thomas Sowell, a modern philosopher and economist, he has a book called Conquest and Cultures, where he traces the development of history and the progression of human advancement through conquest. Because when one territory conquers another, they actually bring with it technology and their superior technology and ways, etc. And this is what happens when the Romans conquered Britain. And Britain advanced very quickly because it adopted Roman technology and thinking and philosophy. And that's why Britain outstripped Scotland later on. So just for a little history lesson, right? These things are included in historical symbols because there was a purpose. Yes, you want to replace it. No one is saying don't replace it, but it's the process that's important. There may very well be a view, a perfectly legitimate view by other members of the society that want to say that, well, there may be a better symbol than pan to put there. They may have their own views. And while yes, the
Or I
majority
may say, why not replace the crown versus the ships? Because
exactly, and you may have
if you're so anti-colonial days and
yeah,
you want to move
yeah.
away from it, well, why not remove the crown?
Well, the coat of arms itself is a colonial relic.
That's very
Coat of
true.
arms is really something that
That's very
families and
true.
ancient medieval families and things, they had their own personal coat of arms, and then well, obviously, it developed the territories and that sort of thing. So I don't get the removing of a symbol to demolish colonialism. Colonialism is a fact of our history. It took place. Nothing we can do in the modern era can erase colonialism or erase the evils of colonialism. It can't. When you replace a symbol now, it has to be that there is a consensus among the population. There's a real reason that you're doing it because it more closely aligns and symbolizes perhaps the modern context and your modern identity as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. But there may very well be a few people who don't want to identify pan as part of their culture. And that's a perfectly legitimate view. It might be of a minority, but guess what? Democracy does not only mean majority prevailing over minority. It also means while respecting the views of the majority, you must protect the interests of the minority and also respect their views. That is a democracy. You can't have the majority of persons always running roughshod over the rights of the minority or the views of the minority. That isn't how a democracy works. You have to respect everyone's rights. So in terms of this whole change of symbol or symbolic gesture, let's put it like that. I do think that the process was bad. I have no strong view either way on the actual change. I would like to think about it. I may wish to do a little research on it and maybe apply my brain and see, well, look, can I find a better symbol, or is that the symbol that should be replaced, etc.? Is there a whole other design? And people are allowed to do that, but you can't do that when you act in this sort of authoritarian way. You show up at your party conference mistaking it as a national forum, because it's a party conference, it's not a national forum, and announcing such an important change to a symbol by which all of us identify as citizens. So I thought that was absolutely wrong and horrific on the part of the Prime Minister. And he should really pull back that step and have proper consultation and put it out. Why not? I remember one time for something they held a competition where you could submit have a let's what we have many talented artists and historians in Trinidad and Tobago. Why not they get together and say, look, Prime Minister, what about this proposal or that proposal? It may very well be even better than a simple replacement of the ship to the coat of arms. The second thing is, as we're on the constitution issue of participation, you're absolutely right. Again, the major theme that emerges from that document that we call the We the People, as is entitled, is exactly that. It is a document purportedly on behalf of we the people, empowering people to participate in decisions and to influence their national affairs, which hopefully bring a better quality of life for them. And there are several proposals in the draft report, or the report, which say that. One of those, of course, is the bringing into being of a referenda. They've recommended that, look, legislation can be passed so that certain questions can be answered by way of referenda. I'm not a great fan of referendum. I'm not a great fan of it, because I do believe
Explain,
that participatory democracy is important. Yeah.
explain to me, break that down. Because there would be a lot of legal jargon
Yeah.
in the report, and
Sure.
what we hope to do today is so that the average human being on the street will
Sure.
understand very clearly some of the recommendations.
Sure. So one of the proposals that the committee proposes is to introduce legislation that brings into being referendum. So what does that mean? Essentially, everyone knows or should know what a referendum is. You go to the people and let every single person have the opportunity, well, those over 18, to vote on an issue that affects the country. So, for example, I do believe that if we are to change the Privy Council to the Caribbean Court of Justice, that should be done by way of a referendum. It means that the government will have to put on a ballot for people to go and vote whether or not they want to retain the Privy Council or they want to replace it with the CCJ. And of course, one of the more famous referendums that took place in the world was the Brexit referendum, which I think a lot of people know about. The British people went
Right.
and they voted and they said they wanted to leave the Brexit arrangement, or leave the European Union. Sorry, they termed it Brexit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is how referendum works. So I do believe there is a place for it. I don't believe in an over reliance on referendum. So, for instance, if you wanted to adopt some very complicated economic measure, we aren't all economists out there. I would like people like Valmiki Arjun to tell me, or we have some economists in the UNC, Mr. Tanko. I would like to hear his views, or I would like to hear the views of Mr. Imbert, who is the Minister of Finance. I don't necessarily want to hear every single citizen's view on it, because it's a highly technical area. If they want to
Well,
do, I
I will
don't know,
say the bail amendment. You
bail,
know,
bail
when
amendment is
when
also
you
something
speak to
that's
that,
highly technical.
yeah,
Yeah,
that can be such an emotional something. Everybody says no, no bail, no bail,
yeah,
no bail,
yeah,
and
yeah.
when you go into the law and you go into the actual bill and you understand, and I say to
Yeah,
myself, so imagine, and I had to try to get persons to understand, because they kept saying,
yeah,
well, y'all don't want to help fight crime. And I said, hold up,
yeah,
just think about this for a moment,
yeah,
how far this can go, and really understand it. So some things can be emotional, some things can be
exactly.
really politicized
Yes,
badly, and then you kind of wind up this population,
yes,
and they have no idea what they've really gotten themselves into.
correct.
So I
And
do agree
questions
that
like
there are
that,
some things.
agreed. Questions like that should be answered by representative democracy, meaning that we have an election, we vote for people, who we think best represents us. They go into parliament, they acquaint themselves with the issues, they come and they consult us, and then they take decisions. It could be a party decision, in relation to certain policy. And that's how a democracy, a representative democracy works. Referendum is really what you call direct democracy. You go straight to the people on a question. And it has its place for major, major, major questions, earth-shattering and shifting questions. But I think ordinarily, the ordinary policies that affect our lives, it should go through the regular parliamentary process. And certainly, you can
Well, I
imagine
think so.
every time you have an issue, you have to go to a referendum, you'd get nothing done, right?
Agreed. But in the maybe we've gone too far, because
Mm.
I have called. I mean, you would have been part of the rebel group, but when for me, I asked, is it time to reevaluate this whole whip issue? So persons do feel as though after you've won, you went on a UNC ticket, you went on a PNM ticket, or whoever ticket, you're now towing a party line.
Yeah.
And we are concerned that you may not be towing our line.
Yeah.
So where's that balance? And so I can see that the needing a referendum, every single bill, every single issue might be too much. But maybe there is maybe it's time to remove some of this Westminster system, certainly the whip, because what you described to me is what I do think the ideal looks like. If I were to vote for an MP, a member of parliament, and a bill comes before the parliament, that MP should then come, whether it be an app, whether it be, you have boxes where people could write their suggestions, however we want to do it, there must be consultation. The MP must take time to break down the bill to his constituents, get the response from the constituents, and I would dare say even have some version of a poll, a vote, or whatever, so that there is, who the stakeholders are. There's real consultation on the bill. And then the MP comes and the MP can justify that, listen, I have had meetings with these stakeholders, these amount of people, this is some of the feedback that we have gotten. So there's a mix between the average constituency, those real stakeholders, those experts in the field within the constituency. There is a balance. And then you can, I also say that part of leadership is charisma, getting buy-in, so taking the time to really explain to your constituents why you believe the vote should be this. So that when you come, it's not, well, the whip say vote yes or no, that's how we vote in. And the citizens, the constituents feel as though that's not what we wanted.
Well, your concerns actually, to me, are also reflected in the consultation document that they did, because one of the highest recommendations, or one of the more popular recommendations which came out, was for proportional representation in the Senate, and for the implementation of proportional representation Senate, and even to directly elect a president. That to me is a manifestation of the population having some difficulty with the current first past the post party parliamentary system where you're locked down in terms of a party. Clearly, there are people who believe that other parties or other interests should be allowed to directly participate in parliamentary proceedings. And a proportional representation system allows that. And I think the way the committee resolved it is that you have proportional representation for senators, and you also have, and then you have the regular first past the post system for the parliament. So that in the Senate, what you actually have is different groups,
House of
different
Representatives.
different, and therefore people are allowed to have different positions, because a single person can go up in the Senate, have his own party, get enough votes. A Marsha Walker, for instance, goes up, gets
look at COP. COP in 2007 may have very well ended up with some senators inside of the upper house.
And you get in the Senate, and you could have your consultation with your members or people who voted for you or your party, and you come and you represent that specific interest in the Senate and say, look, While the UNC holds this view, while the PNM holds the view in the House, I hold this view, or I side with the PNM on this bill, but I'm siding with the UNC on that bill. And it seems to me that that concern that you're articulating there is reflected in the recommendations or the views that have been captured in this report by many people who have said, look, we want to move away from this first past the post system. We want a president who's directly elected. I even saw some comments that were recorded. They want a prime minister that is elected separately from the
From the
actual constituencies or the House of Parliament. So those are important things. Term limits were another important. It was very popular from my reading of the report that a lot of people actually said that there should be term limits for both the prime minister, so that you can't have a prime minister who's going on and on and on in office. Also very important. And another one that I found that also reflects that view, where they want to reform parliament so that you're not locked down in this party control of parliament, where the party in power controls everything, is that they want direct elections, or they want another way to appoint the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, because those are two offices that control the debate, control the flow, and control Parliament, because you can't really challenge the Speaker, even though I saw Ravi Bhargav Maharaj recently file a matter, but you can't really, generally speaking, challenge decisions of the Speaker and or of the President of the Senate in court. So you have to abide by those decisions. As you would know, Marsha, you may be on your feet thinking that you have a very, very relevant point, and you may very well have a relevant point, and maybe the President of the Senate is tired or feels that you're beating up on the PNM too much and says, no, no, move on,
move
etc.
on.
I'm sure it happens. I'm sure our good friend Anna Roberts would have a lot to say about that, right?
Well, I mean,
But
I mean, in my limited time in the Senate, I would
yeah,
say that I did experience that, and I felt as though this is unreal, and you are abusing the taxpayers' dollars. You know.
and my view is, having observed both sets of proceedings, and I don't think myself one prone to exaggeration, but in my view, I have picked up clear apparent bias in my respectful view of the Speaker and the President of the Senate. I have seen it. I think there is clear bias there, and that is why I think that there should be moves to find another way, perhaps through direct election, perhaps through some other form of representative election, or perhaps through proportional representation or some other methodology
Yeah.
whereby the Speaker and or the President of the Senate are not simply appointed by the party in power, perhaps appointed by the JLSC, perhaps appointed by another body, perhaps appointed by a specific body set up to consider persons who may wish to do it. I think those are the important. I think that is important to ensure a better functioning and independent parliament. Yeah. So, so
You,
those are many proposals which I think reflect that parliament needs to reflect more of the views and allow more participation of citizens in the process.
yeah. You spoke about service commissions. I think
Yeah.
that was also something that came up in the report.
It was.
Again, um, trying to take away it seems as though, and this is something that it has been coming up, right? You know, are these institutions truly independent? It
Yeah.
appears as though even the way that they are selected, by nature, it inevitably will have some sort of political interference because of the way that selection happens. I don't know. I see. Are you flipping through it?
Yes, so there was a lot of consideration of the different service commissions. You had the Police Service Commission, the Public Service Commission, Teaching Service Commission. Let's take it a step back. So service commissions are a feature for our constitution. The whole purpose and point of service commissions is to ensure that the persons who are in our public service, which ought to be politically neutral, are not influenced by political actors or political parties or other political office holders. And for good reason. Public services are exactly that, public services. They are meant to be equal and to all citizens and accessible to all citizens. So you want to, what you call, insulate it from political interference. And our constitution, the way that we originally felt that we would deal with it, is to set up these service commissions that would appoint persons, promote them, transfer them, etc., but by way of an independent body. Obviously, total independence and impartiality is almost impossible in a society like Trinidad and Tobago. Ultimately, you have the president that appoints some of these service commissions that are internal, then the president in turn is appointed by a prime minister or electoral college, but it's really the ruling party at the time when you understand how the electoral college is made up, right? So what appears to be the situation now, and we heard it from the prime minister at a sports day. I remember him saying he loves to make these grand announcements in party events that he wants to do away or abolish the service commissions. In my respectful view, I don't think they should be abolished. I think there has to be reform of the service commissions. Currently, most of the service commissions, they're not full time, they don't sit full time. It's almost as though, and they're understaffed, they're set up to fail. If we are able to solve the, the service commission issue, we would be able to increase efficiency in our public service. We would also be able to ensure a perhaps less level of influence in the functioning of these commissions. We saw where you had a police service commission collapse because the prime minister decided to withdraw a list at the last moment, as reported. And many other service commissions have come under attack. We saw, akin to a service commission, the integrity commission, facing pressure and changes because of certain decisions made. These things have to stop. But you see, not all solutions, unfortunately, are going to be found in adjusting the constitution. There has to be a cultural shift as well. Politicians and persons who get into office must understand that they have a wider responsibility, not just to their party and to remain in power, but to society. You have to have forbearance. Just because you have the power to do something, it does not mean that you should do it. You may very well have the power to appoint the JLSC that will in turn control judges, but does that mean that you should appoint a JLSC that would appoint political judges? Obviously not, because people would then lose confidence in the judiciary and in judges, and then you have the collapse of the rule of law. So, insofar as service commissions are concerned, there has to be reform. I think the service commissions must now become full time. I think you have to allow persons in the service commission greater power and autonomy to do these appointments. And perhaps the way we select these service commissions ought not to be by the president. It should be with wider participation. In fact, why not have an opposition party, perhaps an opposition party that achieves a certain amount of votes, because technically you could have more than one opposition party, but the official opposition also being able not only to simply to be consulted, but recommend persons on the service commission. So that ensures some level of scrutiny, because if you have that representation on both sides of different sides of the political divide, then it may enhance scrutiny as to what happens in the service commission. Why not?
So
What's
maybe the
wrong with that?
same type of proportional representation inside of the service
Well,
commission.
it could be quite possible that you find a method of some appointments being done by way of office holders and some appointments being done by way of a democratic vote. People put up their name and they want to go. Or you could have ex officio matters, meaning persons who served as judges could be started to, because they're perceived to be neutral and they've done their entire career with a sort of unbiased approach to resolving disputes. So why not have some of these retired judges now go into these service commissions to give guidance? I don't see. So the point is, when you have a problem, the way to deal with it is not to abolish, is not to simply abolish the institution. It's to take a good hard look at it and decide if it is, we can do things to fix it. But of course, that brings us into the realm that no politician wants to tackle, which is reforming the public service. Because everybody's afraid that if you touch the public service, the unions are going to come after you. And in my view, you have to simply say, look, to hell with that, with all due respect. You have to do things that will allow the country to function properly. Why is the public service inefficient? And yes, you have notable exceptions in the public service, but why are they inefficient? It's because the service commissions are not dealing firstly with discipline in a timely manner. If you have errant public servants, you need to put in stringent disciplinary regulations, set up committees to deal with disciplinary issues, and to have time limits for dealing with them as soon as possible. It is also because, to take the side of the public servants, many public servants are demotivated because it takes so long for you to be promoted in the public service. One of the biggest complaints, in my view, in the police service is that policemen simply are not being promoted on time or being assessed for promotion on time. That is a huge problem. In fact, there was a phenomenon where for a number of years, the board that advises and promotes police in our country didn't sit. And why on earth would you do that? Imagine you are in a job and you can't have advancement. You are there as a police officer, risking your life every day, fighting the worst elements in society, and also dealing with, sometimes traumatic situations that you have to go into. It could be as simple as a domestic violence dispute to something far greater, but that takes a psychological toll on you to deal with that. You're there reporting in and out, and you are there thinking, well, one day if I do the grunt work and the hard work and I study and I do some advancement, I will then advance in my career and maybe be a corporal and a superintendent and maybe one day commissioner of police. But then for 5 or 10 years, there's no possibility of promotion. Doesn't that demotivate you as a police officer? Doesn't that tell me, well, why am I killing myself? It's best I sit down here in the station and take my salary and relax. These are the kind of problems that you have to solve, and the Public Service Commission and the Service Commissions and the Police Service Commission aren't dealing with this because it's either they are under-resourced, they don't have the will, or they're simply inefficient. We need to treat with this, and we need to do it in a meaningful way. And my view, my recommendation is that we revamp these service commissions. We bring in not only public servants, but you are allowed to advertise and bring in professionals, pay them well because you have to attract them, find a different way to appoint service commissions and get them functioning full time. And also, you need to have supervision of these public servants so that the parliament needs to supervise to understand if they're doing their job quickly or we need to replace them, right? So these are the things I think that would help in terms of the service commission. I'm not about abolishing it at all. Yeah.
You had said something. Okay. Yeah. So I think you answered that actually. So Trinidad and Tobago has reached the stage where half measures are no longer sensible. That was same 6.4.
Yeah.
Where do we begin? Okay. Let me pull back a little bit. Everybody, come election time, every third party say we will reform the constitution. We'll reform the constitution. We'll reform the constitution. I think I did not send it to you, but
That's
in
okay.
the constitution,
yeah,
section
majority.
Yeah, but
The
not
special
special
majority.
majority. No, it's not special majority. I'm going to find it. I argue with this. I argue with people all the time about it. Page 53, section 54. I'm going to send it to you right away.
It's
Do you
in
have
the
your
report.
phone there?
I have your report here, 53.
Okay. So this is
Yeah.
not the constitution. This is not the report. This is the actual constitution.
Oh, sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but I
Okay.
tell me this section. Yes.
So section 54. And it is, how do I read this, Kyle? Section 54, 3,
Yeah.
D.
Changes to the constitution, is that you?
Yeah. Yes. I actually, if you check your phone, I just sent you a
Right.
screenshot of it.
So essentially, the constitution has different sections.
Yeah.
You have a fundamental rights section, which is section 4,
Right.
which enshrines your right to liberty, freedom of the press, freedom of expression. And then you have the nuts and bolts section, or the skeleton sections of the constitution, which sets up the service commissions, sets up the Tobago House of Assembly, the Integrity Commission, and several other institutions, the Office of the President, the Parliament, etc. There are two changes that you can make as lawmakers. You can pass legislation that is inconsistent with the Constitution rights, and you need a special majority in Parliament to get that done, right? But in order to change other parts of the Constitution, such as changing the service commissions, etc., you need two-thirds. Two-thirds
Well,
of
this
the...
says here 3/4,
Sorry,
3/4.
3/4. I apologize. Two-thirds, yeah, 3/4, right? And therefore...
2/3 is a special majority.
Yes, special is 3/5.
Right.
Right?
But
yeah.
a lot of persons never remember that there's something called a constitutional majority.
Yes.
Because I hear persons arguing all the time, but UNC had 29 seats. Well, no. There
Yeah.
are things that you cannot change.
There are
If you
some things that you could,
There's some
and there are
things that
some
you,
things that you can't.
yeah,
You
and
could have
and
passed legislation. You could have passed legislation that was inconsistent with certain fundamental rights and other constitutional principles because you had that majority. But to change fundamentally certain things, you could not do it, right?
yeah,
Because you needed the special majority here
the
in the House.
constitutional majority.
Constitutional majority, correct. And then there's a specific majority, I think, for finance as well. And
Yeah.
that's the point, to bring it back to the politics, that's the point. Um, if the when this document, when the committee was set up, the Prime Minister and the PNM very well knew that whatever recommendations came out of this report, it would require the support and assistance of the United National Congress. I think that was very clear. Because of the way Parliament is now, I believe it's 1920.
So you need 31 seats.
Correct. You need
Again,
31.
this is
So
something that,
they
and so
needed,
yeah, so
they
I argue
needed,
that all the time. When third
yes,
parties come and they say we're gonna reform constitution, we're gonna reform the constitution. I say
yes.
y'all understand that you need 31 seats to reform the constitution. So you
Certain
and
parts, yes.
this is something that, for me, it's very important that citizens understand, because citizens love to hear, yes, they're talking constitutional reform. And I say, listen, that's a buzzword.
Yeah,
Or when they would stand up and they say, and I mean, I'm not defending Kamala, but when they stand up and say the People's Partnership had 29, I say you cannot change the things that you're looking for to change, these things that are coming out in this report. You
yeah,
can't change that unless you have 31 seats. Unless I
yes.
am misreading my constitution, you cannot change that unless you have 31 seats.
31,
So
yes. So they were just short. To,
this kind of change the constitution, we will change the constitution, and everybody puts it on their manifesto that they will change the constitution.
yeah.
Unless somebody wins with 31 plus seats, you ain't changing no
You
constitution.
can't change, yes, I agree with you. You can't change the architecture of the Constitution in regards to something. There are things that you can pass,
Yeah.
special legislation without problems, that could affect, let's say, constitutional changes. So, for instance, you could tinker with the EBC Act, you could tinker with certain other pieces of simple legislation because you now have the majority. But if you are going to change the actual
set the,
structure of
the
the
set
Constitution, you can't
election
change it.
dates. If
Yeah.
I'm reading, because it gives you the when you I mean if you pull it
Well, you're
up,
not. You can't change the election
yeah,
date without, yeah, because of
exactly,
the
because it gives
elections.
you specific
Yeah,
lines
sections. Yeah,
that you
correct.
cannot touch without the three-fourths majority, right?
Yes.
And so I then, pulled all the different parts and I said, but
Yeah.
everything, all the things that you're seeing here. Well, when I say the main things that when people think constitutional reform, they think, the way that the president is elected,
President,
set
cabinet, speaker,
set election
yeah,
dates, term
civil
limits, all these
commission, yeah.
kinds of things that,
Voting systems, proportional
yes,
first
true,
past the post, cannot
all of
change it.
that, you need 31 seats. You need to
Well, you can,
surpass.
I suppose you can campaign on it, not that I'm defending any third parties, but I suppose you can campaign on it and say, well, if everybody votes for
Well,
me,
but
I'll
you
have
should add. Well, what you should make sure and do is add that we will need 31 seats
31 seats.
inside
Yes,
of Parliament.
yes, I
And
agree.
because this is again, I feel as though it. So I do agree that there's a lot of sort of election gimmick around this constitutional reform, because
Yes.
many persons do not understand that it cannot just happen. It's not something so easy.
My position on that, I do think constitutional reform is important enough that we should speak about it and we should discuss it and we should include it in our, let's say, decision making process at the time of election. I do think it's a very, very important issue because constitutional reform goes to every issue, crime, health, etc. I do
Well,
think that the
if I
way
quote
this
from it,
report,
if I
Mhm.
quote from the same
Yeah,
report now,
mhm.
6.4, page 160, Trinidad and Tobago has reached the stage where half measures are no longer sensible. So
Yeah,
there is a deep frustration um throughout that introduction, that I think is the executive summary that
yeah,
I'm reading from.
yeah.
You can see that there is a frustration. Persons want the reform, and which I guess is why you should campaign on it.
You have to, and that's my point.
How do
No
we go
constitutional change
from
comes about.
how
Sorry, you
do
go
we
ahead.
go, Kyle, from, because Again, in the same summary, there is frustration, there is skepticism, yet another report, yet another consultation. How do we make it happen?
Well, I mean, you have the solution. We just have to get 31 seats.
31 seats.
We
Okay.
just have to get 31. But
Okay.
the point is,
Okay. So let me
when
ask
we
you a
get,
question then. Why would a government in its second term, in its last year, now ask for a report? Can this, in your respectful, humble opinion, can this really happen? Can we see how long? Let's assume that the opposition was on board with this. Let's be really, really positive, and they're going to get their 31 votes. How fast can these things happen? Because the
I
report's now
suppose it
saying that
depends.
another committee has to be set up, huh?
Well, it depends on what you want to achieve. For instance, if we simply wanted to amend the fixed date election, that could be done very quickly if the opposition supported it. And perhaps, I can't see a reasonable objection to a fixed date for election, save and except that it provides a tactical advantage to you when you're in government, which of course is nobody's, not any citizen's interest at all. So why not start with the low hanging fruit? Start with the fixed date election. Start with maybe electing a speaker of the house. Start with those things. But you see, it would involve a type of political maturity that I'm not sure the prime minister or the People's National Movement have at this point, where they can simply say, "I'm willing," or any party. I mean, I'm not targeting anybody. Any political
Well, I
party.
mean, I was
It's
going
a
to
very
tell you that
difficult
technically
thing
I
to give
feel
a
this
power.
I was going to tell you that I feel as though they no election date benefits the opposition
Everybody,
sometimes
everybody,
because they say it all the time,
it's
election coming,
to
election
use a
coming.
cricket analogy, you don't want to show the batsman what ball you're going to bowl. You might get hit for six, right? So they want to keep this thing in their back pocket as long as possible and announce it when they're ready. But the point is, if you are serious about constitutional reform, then these are the simpler proposals that you can effect and get opposition support for. And if the opposition doesn't want to support it, well, I suppose you come out looking better because you say, look, this is the reform that I want. This is good for the country. Why is the opposition not supporting it? But that isn't the approach that has been taken. The prime minister, fully well knowing, and again, this is not attacking the prime minister. I'm saying prime minister because that is the person or his government that set up the committee. In setting up this committee, you knew that opposition support was required to make even the simplest changes in the constitution. And yet, you have gone out and you've attacked them because the first thing that has come out in relation to the opposition is, well, you didn't participate. And I think that is absolutely wrong. I think that the opposition, the United National Congress, is a party that has progressed constitutionalism in our country. Some of the legislation that we have passed as the UNC has been to enhance constitutional rights. I always talk about the Freedom of Information Act. Anybody who has a challenge, a constitutional challenge, one of the first steps the lawyer advises them to do is to file an FOIA because you need information to launch your constitutional complaint. So, same thing with judicial review. You may wish to challenge the exercise of power by a public authority. It's a fundamental constitutional principle that arbitrary power is wrong, and therefore the Judicial Review Act allows you to challenge it. These are important steps in the progression of constitutional rights that the UNC has promoted and fought for and implemented. So it's wrong to say the UNC is not participating in constitutional reform. If you're talking about this specific exercise, which took place only over, the period of a few months, well, to the back of the report, there are a number of, there's actually recited the people who made contributions. My name is there. Um, I identify as UNC. There are several other persons who made submissions who I identify with as UNC. And therefore, you can't say, because what is a party? It's the people in the party. So don't say that nobody in the UNC or the UNC didn't participate. And then thirdly, the very report cites the Ramada report and builds on it and actually agrees with the Ramada report and recommendations in certain regards, especially with regard to proportional representation. And that was a UNC or a People's Partnership / UNC driven process. So this document does have contributions from the, let's say, intellectual capital or policy of the UNC. So don't say that the UNC has not participated in the process. It's absolutely wrong. And there's no need to be inflammatory. If you want to engage the UNC, engage in a meaningful way. Pick up your pen and paper, write to the opposition leader, send the report, and say, ma'am, this is the report. What proposals in here would you be willing to support? Because we need your votes. Also, what proposals in here, even if you are willing to support them with modifications, tell us the modifications. Let's consider it and let's come to Parliament and pass some meaningful reform that would benefit the lives of ordinary people in Trinidad today. Simple.
Simple.
Yeah.
So you spoke about fixed election dates, and that was
Yeah.
low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And then you actually spoke about, which is, I
I'm not
always say,
sure. I feel I know where you're going with this question, but go ahead.
oh, well, you don't know where I'm going with this question.
Okay.
Because I always say that I think Keith Rowley is actually a genius politician. Whether he has done well to govern the country, I think he's a good politician. So I thought that your strategy with, calling the low-hanging fruit out, putting the ball in the opposition court was a good suggestion. Except that he's come out, the PNM has come out and said they will not support fixed election date.
Yep,
But
I
they've come out
suppose
to say it. So they've not, so they've said we don't support proportional representation. We don't support fixed election dates. So
well,
they're not even. They're not even.
and it's a historical thing that the PNM does not support proportional representation. I believe one of the reported comments of the late Dr. Williams was that it's a dagger in the heart of the PNM. So that one didn't surprise me. I'm surprised by fixed date election. I don't know who on earth would engage in a genuine way constitutional reform and not expect that one of the proposals in our society that would come back at you like a boomerang is that we want fixed dates for elections. That is something that has always been spoken about. I can't see any political party being serious about constitutional reform and not finding a way to deal with the right of recall. I can't see any serious political party talking about constitutional reform and not be prepared to deal with campaign finance reform, right? These are all themes that commentators from even before I had any political awareness have been speaking about, and it continues through many people today. That these are the things that we think as a people, we the people, not we the party, we the people think ought to be implemented. And it's now contained in your report. I say your report, the report that is commissioned by your government. And here you are, opening salvo, we in the PNM don't support that. Well, this is what the people want. And in a democracy, you have to respect what people want. And if the reporters condense that, well, why not consider it? Why? What is the harm? And I can't, for the life of me, for instance, the fixed date election, I can't for the life of me understand what is so objectionable in that. People could, and that doesn't take away your right, Marsha, necessarily to call a snap election. You can still do that. You can still try to do it and catch the opposition off guard. But what we know is that an election has to be called on a certain time and a certain date, regardless.
Yeah. Well, I was just letting you know that part, because I did see it in the news. So I don't know if you missed it, but they came out and said, nope, no fixed date, full stop.
Totally unfortunate, and it is not the way to deal with constitutional reform in a meaningful way. It's not. That's not the approach. The approach has to be put aside some of the partisan rhetoric and approach us in a genuine way. I say us, approach the UNC or all factions of society, and let's see what we can get past. All
right. So we should have Sarah Jane Waddle joining us. I mean, you're welcome to join, to stay on if you want to talk more. But
I think I'll let you all debate those issues.
I don't know if she's on. I've sent a message. I can't see it. So I don't know if you know, they have well, first of all, I don't have any earpiece in my ear talking to my producer. So I've sent a message just to find out if she's on. But there was a point, I think, okay, so you've covered it. Is there anything else that you would have? Because, as I said, it's a long document.
Mhm.
The average citizen is will not read through it. Is there anything that you think in particular that we would have missed out
I
that
think
you
there's
want to
one
just
thing.
make sure that
There's one.
citizens know
There's one
about?
thing that I sure yeah sorry. There's one thing that I found very interesting. I am and I have been an advocate for licensed firearms. That is something I believe in. I don't mean to make it sound that I want to have, a showdown at the OK Corral in Trinidad and Tobago. But I do think citizens are entitled to own firearms to protect themselves. And I do think that in our current state, because the criminal element can so easily access firearms because of our proximity to South America and porous borders, that to give the average citizen a fighting chance, or at least a businessman or someone who is susceptible to be kidnapped or robbed, a fighting chance to defend themselves and their families, they should have access to firearms. The law allows people to apply for a firearm license, and it's up to the discretion of the commissioner of police to grant it. I think that there are serious problems in that process. People are waiting too long to be processed and for a decision to be made in relation to them. One of the interesting things that I saw in the report is that many citizens, Marsha, actually called for a constitutional right to bear arms. And what does that mean? It has to mean that that is a symptom of crime in our country, that citizens feel that they need to protect themselves and their families, and they want firearms to be given a constitutional status. And what that would mean is that perhaps the licensing regime would be eased up. People would get the type of firearm that they want without restriction, which I think obviously is wrong. I don't think people should be walking around machine guns, etc. But I do think that that is a serious problem that has to be addressed. If there is a need and if people feel the need to do it, and it's a process in law, the government needs to not take a position where it's frustrating the citizens' rights to obtain firearms and be able to defend themselves. One of my suggestions that I have said, instead of, I hear a lot of people talking about it, talking but not offering solutions. One of the solutions I think that has to be done is that the government ought to set up a firearms authority in Trinidad and Tobago, where you hire a multitude of investigators, perhaps ex-policemen, ex-soldiers, etc. Because at current, my understanding is there are very few investigators in the police service who can actually go out and investigate Kiel Taklalsingh to see whether he's a fit person to have a firearm. So you need a full panoply of investigators, staff it properly, charge an appropriate fee. Persons who obtain firearms, they can afford these things, I think. Charge an appropriate fee for it, and process these persons as fast as possible. And processing people doesn't mean giving away firearms. It means assessing whether people are fit, competent, healthy enough to own a firearm and suitable, and then you can have it. And I think if we set up, move it away from the police service, you can have ex-policemen or etc. staff it, and keep the commissioner of police as perhaps the head of the firearm authority with other persons to process applications as fast as possible and to treat with them and even to seize firearms where firearm users are negligent or wrong, and do these investigations. And because I haven't been involved in several firearm litigation where persons' licenses have been suspended. I've won cases like that where people have taken too long. I've won cases where the state had to give a decision and grant firearms, etc. It shouldn't be that litigation is needed to obtain the means to protect yourself. And I found it very interesting that in the document, they recorded, it was sufficient enough that people recorded that they wanted a constitutional right to bear arms, which I disagree with. I don't think we should be given a constitutional right to bear arms, because that would mean that people could use any firearm they want unregulated, almost unregulated, without licenses, without waiting times, etc. And we see the litigation in America with that, right? With the NRA, the National Rifle Authority. I believe the motto is "Take my guns from my cold dead hands." We don't want that kind of culture in Trinidad. But what it means, it's symptomatic of a problem in Trinidad where people really feel the need to acquire these firearms to protect themselves, and with good reason. We see what's happening in society, right? And we've seen instances, many instances, where legal firearm owners have drawn their firearm and been able to protect themselves from the criminal element and their families. And if they didn't have that firearm, the Lord knows what may have befallen them and their families and their loved ones. So I thought that was a very interesting a very interesting plug or a very interesting part of the Constitution of the document.
There is, so you speak about the right to bear arms, but that would require some sort of, or at least, okay, so you spoke to two things: the process to get a firearm now,
Yeah.
but we also have law where, I mean, someone defends their home. There was a case with a wife using the husband's firearm. So I think that our law may not necessarily encourage persons to think of using, even if they have passed the stage of having a licensed firearm. Can you just spend a few minutes while we wait on Sarah to speak to that law? I mean, and I know that during the I think it was local government, the clip comment, but and I think you actually spoke about it a more sober minded way. How do we change the law so that there is protection? Because as it stands, if I understand it correctly, the criminal has the advantage, and it can actually put the firearm owner in some hot water if
Yeah.
if they do defend themselves and they do end up shooting, murdering, or I mean, if I just use an example, I mean, okay, let's assume my husband had a firearm and he's taken out in the process. If I pick up the firearm or I shoot, or it's by our bedside. I don't know, but you know,
So
I could
currently,
take jail to protect my children.
of course, I think we all would. Currently, the self-defense law is governed by common law. And there's a case, R.V. Palmer, which essentially says, ancient English case, which essentially says that you can use force that is reasonable in the circumstances to defend yourself. And that would provide you with a defense to all criminal offenses as long as you're acting in self-defense. So all of those things, as long as you're acting in self-defense, you're fine. What I think has to happen,
What is
and I
reasonable, though, Kyle?
so you've hit the nail on the head there, right? There's a lot of case laws of what is reasonable. There's some cases that say you don't have to retreat, you don't have to fire a warning shot, and in fact, there are some cases that say that you can have what you call a preemptory strike if you perceive fear, meaning that without any aggression, if you're convinced, the reasonable person is convinced that your life or your family would be under threat, you can draw first blood, so to speak. Those things are too vague in my view, in my respectful view. And that's where the sobriquet or the quote, stand your ground came in. It is my view that when you come to the house where you are in your household, you're with your family, and there is intrusion, there is nothing like reasonable force. If you are, my view is that the self-defense law should be codified, should be put down in statute. We can have a specific act to treat with it. Call it stand your ground, call it self-defense, call it reform of larceny, call it householder protection bill, whatever you want, right? We can make a provision to say that where the scenario is that that you are in your property, your household, and there is an intruder in your house, you as a householder can use any force that you deem necessary to repel a threat. There should be nothing like reasonable force. If you come into my house and my wife and my children or my family is there, I'm sorry, that's the way I feel about it. And I do think that that can be spelled out very clearly. And insofar as the opposition leader or the opposition has spoken about stand your ground law, I support any provision. I can draft it today if they want it and send it. And I've said so. That is fairly, it's not a difficult process. Of course, with amendment, and I don't claim to have all the answers in terms of drafting, and of course, whatever. But it's there, it can be done. I also think that you can adjust the Firearm Act to allow for limited FULs, meaning we don't want people going all about the place with firearms all over the country. And I think that's where the safe zone comment came out, right? I do think you can have a limited FUL to keep an FUL in your house that can be used by a wife, a husband, or any other person certified to do so. And what that puts in the mind of a bandit or intruder is that houses may now have firearms lodged there and people who are ready to use it. So they are weighing the risk. The bandit is going to weigh the risk. Do I try to enter this house that may have a firearm that will get me killed? Right? And I think, again, it was, I can't remember who did this study, but the study was such that they passed a law, and you can Google it. The study was such that they passed a law in a very, in an area in America, and when they passed the law was actually that it was mandatory for householders to have firearms. And break-ins and household burglaries dropped because obviously burglars or persons breaking in now knew for sure that these householders, all householders, had access to a firearm. So if you're going in there, you could potentially lose your life for what? Some jewelry, a phone, or this or that. And it was an interesting statistic, and it's there. And therefore, I do think that a limited FUL can be granted for those, not mandatory, obviously, but for those who wish to have an FUL in their house. The police can satisfy themselves that it's secured and that persons are there, are trained and competent to use it. And of course, it's not, it can't be accessed by children, etc. You have to satisfy, there's risk, but you have to be able to do it, and it's a decision for the household. And I think with those two pieces of legislation, a limited FUL more available to householders, and an adjustment to the self-defense law whereby a householder does not have to worry about the niceties of self-defense law when it comes to protecting themselves. I think it would give bandits and, let's say, persons who want to break in homes something else to think about, so that you will see a drop in home invasions, because that's a particularly bad scourge in our country, right? I am not necessarily a supporter of the average person having a firearm and going in a bar and lime or going in a fete, or these kind of things. You don't know. You might consume alcohol unwittingly, even possibly, and some conflict happens, and then once a firearm is in play, well, it's lost a life. So I do think there has to be restrictions in the public, but I do believe in the sanctity of your house. Yeah.
Because I actually had, and I didn't want to interrupt you because I mean you were going, but right now, I mean, murder. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, I know that we have some amendments to bail and whatnot,
Yeah.
but the length of time that a husband who's defending his wife and children will have to wait to defend his decision to say it was reasonable, it was this, it was that.
Yeah.
I mean, do they get bail? Can they get bail? It's murder. Someone's dead. They sit in jail waiting for their trial for 20 years.
I remember having this discussion with our good friend Anis Rahman, a lawyer who and he said, and he was passionate about it. He said, yeah, when the bandit breaking in, I'm going to print the case of R.V. Palmer from the House of Lords and read it, and then decide if I'm going to kill the bandit. And obviously, I agree with him. Yes, we know that there is a law, but we don't want to have to take the chance. A second could mean a life. And I think once you come into the sanctity of my home, all bets are off. I must have the ability to use any force that I deem fit to protect myself and my family. And you give me that presumption in law. And as they say, a man's house is a man's castle, or a person's house is a person's castle. Let me be gender neutral.
That's fine. I'm okay with gender roles.
I'm teasing you because I
Yes,
know I know
yes, I'm okay
the
with gender
discussion
roles.
that is going to be upcoming.
So as the law stands right now, just
Yeah.
clarify for us. Someone comes into my home and my husband believes that it is his role to lay his life down, and he
Yeah.
will go to jail if he has to for his wife and children. If he pulls a firearm, or a knife or whatever it is, and kills an intruder, as it stands right now, what is that husband's position? Does he have to go
The
to
husband,
jail and fight for his
the
life?
husband's position is what practically happens, and this is of course not
Yeah,
relating
that's
to
what we
any
want. The
specific.
practical, not all the
Yeah,
airy fairy. What happens in
practically what
Trinidad and
happens.
Tobago as of today?
Practically what happens, the police arrive at the scene, they look at where the body is, where the body is positioned, where you shot from, did you need, and they will try to determine, was the force necessary in the circumstances? Was the force used reasonable in the circumstances? Did you quote unquote empty the clip? on someone coming in. The normal thing that people talk about is that if someone is coming with a slingshot, right? Are you going to pull out a bazooka, right? No, but where does that leave you if you don't know what the bandit is coming with? You don't know, right? And that's why I think, yes, eventually after a trial, when you are charged with murder, and we know that bail, even though the law now is you can get bail, but getting bail even now, even though there is bail for murder or manslaughter, it's very difficult to get. And then you have to stand surety and put bail and all this nonsense. The position should be that I, as a householder, can use the force that I deem necessary that will clear it up for the police. So unless the police have evidence that I invited somebody in my home to kill them, or that I was malicious, meaning that I knew this person, I tried to kill him in my house, then there's no question of someone being charged or even detained because an intruder came into their homes and they were killed, and the intruder was killed.
So
Right?
as at right now, the bottom line is there is that question still. There is still
I
the
do think,
uncertainty that if
yes,
something happens,
yes.
because I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's so unreasonable. Am I supposed to wait till he pulls a gun and starts to shoot to then fire back?
And you
And
don't,
how
the
do we
question is
determine what
no.
is reasonable? And
The
so at
answer is no. You don't have to. But the problem is the way the law is, questions are going to be asked, and you may very well be charged. You may very well be
Kyle, I
detained.
telling you, anytime you make because I know that the prime minister talks about mangoes and all kind of shoppiness and your football in
Yeah,
my yard and all kind of shoppiness,
rubbish,
right? But
rubbish.
you come through my gate, all right, I could wait, but anytime you come through my front door, or if we all hiding in the bedroom door, I telling you
Yeah,
how it's going to work. That clip pull back, and once you walk through that door,
yeah.
we ain't waiting to see if it's a butter knife, a slingshot, or a rifle
Correct.
you have in your hand. From the time you've entered the bedroom door, shot firing.
Yeah,
Once you reach there,
correct. And that's because no one comes into your house.
exactly.
An intruder doesn't come into your house to, break bread. They come in there to do harm, and you don't know where that situation will end up. That situation, even if it doesn't lead to loss of life, could result in a scenario that would scar you for the rest of your life. So I should be entitled to defend myself and my home. Yeah.
All right. Well, Kyle,
But
thank you very, very much. We're
of
going to
course,
go into what should be our second hour. But you always have such insightful information for us.